US Secretary of State Marco Rubio told leaders here in Munich that Europe and America belong together in an attempt to build bridges after a fraught 18 months. The EU's chief replied, saying lines have been crossed that can't be uncrossed, but they all agree on what needs to be done and they are delivering. I spoke to Slovenia's foreign minister directly after that speech to ask for her reaction on that and more. Minister, thank you so much for joining me. Will Europe be breathing a sigh of relief after that speech? Because we heard from Mr. Rubio, you know, this is about hope. It is our preference to do this together. We want to create something that is better. But at the same time, he talked about the current path being of Western decline, the US coming in, lifting everyone up, solving the situation. How will Europe be reacting to this?
I certainly believe that a sign of hope is better than no dialogue and being on the other sides. I think it's very positive to have so many representatives from US here, including with State Secretary Rubio. And as we speak, he's still talking, but nevertheless, the messages they are passing to Europe are very encouraging. We know that we live in a very complex geopolitical time where we see the big powers playing competition and that the world order is seriously jeopardized, including the institutions, seeing a lot of transactional relations. And as we heard yesterday, we are living with a war on European continent, with the wars around and in the times of many armed conflicts. So we need a dialogue. We need this transatlantic partnership be alive, be close. We have also NATO alliance that gives us collective security. And I think, especially I can say from the perspective of Slovenia being a small country inside the European Union and ally of NATO, this security question is extremely important.
But we heard yesterday from Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, from Emmanuel Macron, the French President, talking about a partnership of equals. And what we hear today from Marco Rubio is sort of the idea of the US coming in and lifting everyone up and having to play that role in the sense that Europe is not capable of doing it without the US.
I think it is important to stress what does it mean partnership of equals. I think it was very meaningful also yesterday if you saw the elephant in the room, who we are talking about and no one is saying. I think it's important to be sincere in this dialogue. Also when you disagree, and of course we've seen a January that was extremely dynamic, from Venezuela to Greenland to tariffs, threats, and also border peace, not to mention at least. These are questions that are raising concerns, political, legal, and for that reason I think this dialogue here, sincere dialogue between partners and allies, is extremely important.
So will Europe be leaving this conference at the end of this weekend more positive, more hopeful about the Transatlantic Alliance, or much the same?
Of course, there will be time of the analysis afterwards, because now it's a lot of discussions still ongoing. But I think we need some optimism. I think we need to leave Munich Security Conference with hopes, because it's a huge responsibility, not only on politicians and governments, but also we have to take care for our societies and our civilians, because we really have to stream to peace and dialogue and stability. The times require us that, and the geopolitics too. And I wish to see also to strengthen multilateralism, to strengthen the rule of law, and also the UN Charter. We need to work inside the institutions and also to really somehow reform and make multilateralism more effective.
And on that question of peace, the Ukrainian president said yesterday there has been big progress in Munich towards ending the war in Ukraine, but efforts so far haven't worked. So why is there so much optimism from him now?
I mean, the talks are ongoing, diplomacy is happening on the other side. We all know that Ukraine has a lot of friends, a lot of support. It's about the simple understanding that no one can by force take your land away. So we really argue for a just and lasting peace, the peace that is acceptable for Ukraine based on UN Charter. So we will continue supporting Ukraine, and it's also about stability, peace and democracy on European continent. And I think from that Zelensky also has some optimism, and I do hope that seeing now this winter with low temperature, terrible destruction of infrastructure, energy, water, people suffering, that we will get to the situation, the sides sit down, start meaningful negotiations, and we manage to end this war. So ceasefire and the pressure on Moscow is more than urgent.
Some in Europe are calling for Europe to restart direct talks with Russia. I spoke yesterday with Estonia's defence minister. He told me there is no point for that because Russia doesn't respect Europe. And there has to be that respect in order to have any point to those discussions. Do you agree with that?
I mean, pretty much we heard yesterday the same from Chancellor Merz. I think there are different voices. Of course, I also could agree with those saying we have to have dialogue open to find a compromise, to have negotiations, but of course conditions has to be there. We as Europeans need to know what is our offer, what do we want to achieve. And of course the first say here has Zelensky and Ukrainians. But I do hope that we will get into a situation to start negotiations with Europeans at the table, because at the end of the day, there is also a question of strong safety guarantees that something like that, this terrible, brutal Russian aggression in Ukraine doesn't repeat on a European soil.
Let me ask you about Iran, because Trump has sent a second aircraft carrier to the Middle East in the last 24 hours or so to increase that pressure. Is the threat of military action the right way to force negotiations?
It's difficult to say what is all happening. We are following the situation in Iran with a great concern. Of course, we've seen a lot of demonstrations on the street, also peaceful demonstrations, but on the other hand, a lot of arrests, violence, that we strongly condemned also, and we called the authorities to release political prisoners, other prisoners, and really respect the human rights obligations. So Iran is in a turmoil, and the whole Middle East can be consequently in a turmoil. For that reason, I do commend all efforts for the negotiations between US and Iran. I think we have to really exhaust all possibilities of finding diplomatic solution to the military one.
Is, as he says, regime change the best thing that could happen?
This is, I think, difficult to say, because I don't see that demonstrations so far shook the regime to the extent that we can expect in the near future the change.
And finally, Minister, I need to ask you about Gaza, because Trump's peace board meets for the first time next week. And here in Munich, Kaja Kallas said it was a personal vehicle for the US president, which makes no reference to Gaza and removes any accountability for the Palestinian people. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that, because looking to the declaration, there is no mentioning on all of the pages Gaza itself. And you know that the resolution that we also, Slovenia, voted in the Security Council was speaking about Gaza mandate exclusively. So we really wish to see all these maybe legal uncertainties being addressed, including the mandate being narrowed down to Gaza, and also discuss it through the UN institutions, because honestly, I don't see that we can have a lasting peace in the Middle East without having this mandate from the UN. So for that reason, also Slovenia, we got the invitation, but as these questions are not really properly addressed, we are following. We, of course, welcome every initiative. We want to see two-state solution, sustainable ceasefire, humanitarian assistance to civilians, and also I commend the work if that will really bring just and lasting peace to Palestinians on the ground and mostly their independent state.
Because we've moved into phase 2, and yet this winter we've seen Palestinians freezing to death in their waterlogged tents. We've seen limited exits and entries via the Rafah crossing, which is supposed to be opened. We've seen ongoing airstrikes. Is this peace?
I mean, it's horrible to say, at least not only Gaza, that there are still strikes ongoing, there is not sufficient humanitarian assistance, many excuses of what is dual use at the borders. But also West Bank, don't forget, because we see their illegal annexation ongoing. The cabinet recently announced even further continuation, which we strongly condemned, because that really hinders any option of a two-state solution. So it's important that this ceasefire really is sustained, that we have second phase of negotiations, and that we really do work on the two-state solution. So for that reason, we supported Palestinian authority, that we really can work towards that direction, because also Palestinian statehood is the only guarantee for safety of Israelis and Palestinians living side by side.
But many countries this year obviously have recognised Palestinian statehood. You know, Slovenia is among those countries. But yet we continue to see expansions of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, again, as we move to phase 2 of this peace plan. And it seems like those two are completely incompatible.
I mean, it's about accountability. I think the whole international community, especially the countries that have strong leverage, we have to work with the Israeli government to come to the understanding that Palestinians have equal rights to live there in peace and security. Slovenia was among first that recognized after terrible Hamas attacks on the 7th of October, and the other countries followed, but I see today that of course we need to do much more. And we will continue with our pressure. We introduced a lot of bilateral sanctions. Maybe next step is also to seriously consider in the international community what can be further sanctions towards the Israeli government in case this ceasefire doesn't sustain and there are no meaningful negotiations in the second phase.
And does that look like suspending the trade agreement with Israel?
I mean, it's, I'm afraid that inside the EU there will be no political willingness for such steps, but still, as Slovenia, we will continue with the pressure mostly to protect civilians and protect international law and humanitarian law.
Minister, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.